Thanks, man. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Let me just get myself set up here really quick. Get this. Sorry, bear with me. All right. So, thank you so much for having me. This is what an honor to be here in front of so many people. I had no idea that so many people would be interested to come and hear me talk. So shout out to you guys. Right, so let's get into it, if this is going to work. Hello, buonasera, eu sono Dave, all the Romanian I know. Let's move on. Where do I point this thing? Okay, so why are we here today? We are here today to talk a little bit about how to make your brand stand out. So what I do is I'm a creative strategist. So that basically means I spend my days thinking about how to make brands stand out, how to make international brands stand out, how you can localize them, how you can, make their nuances express themselves in a way that connect with people. And what I want to talk about with you guys today is I just want to take you through a few things, particularly one way of thinking that I find very useful, and us at Virtue, which is a creative agency, that little pigeon logo up there, that's our actual logo, but we're obviously operating one of 5 areas of business that is under the Vice logo. Let's get into it, how to make your brand stand out. I hope you find this useful. So, first of all, I want to just give a little bit of a context to the brand. It's kind of a buzzword these days. Lots of people are talking about it. But I find there's a lot of different definitions of it. So I want to start by just, giving a bit of a context as to why is the brand so damn important? Why is it such an important conversation in business? Why is it that even consumers and cultures care and connect so much with brands? I found this definition by Forbes that I quite liked. So the brand is everything the public thinks it knows about. Let me read it off this one. It's everything the public thinks it knows about your name brand offering, both factual and emotional. Important, very important, the emotional bit. Your brand name exists objectively. People can see it. It's fixed. But your brand exists only in people's minds, right? So that's the thing. That's the kind of crazy thing about it is, it's not, if I see a Nike tick on the wall, it's not the Nike tick that's emotional, it's everything that just comes to mind when I look at that Nike tick. All of its behaviors, past engagements, everything like that. That's what the brand is. So how do we get here? These are just kind of some key things that I feel like really led to the importance and the prominence of the brand. Starting off with, the brand is worth serious cash. It drives real value for businesses. They're really, I think back in 1990s, there was a point at which really there was a moment where a brand didn't add any value to your company, and then after a certain case, this idea of valuation of an intangible asset became factored in stock exchanges and company values, which is why it's super valuable. It's something to really drive growth for your business. Next, we live with technology. It's an obvious one, I'm sure, but it's just the fact that we live more and more with technology. Technology is itself delivered by a brand. It's a product of a brand and services. And also the technology is a vehicle for more and more opportunities for other brands to connect with us in a day-to-day basis, in more and more of micro moments here and there. Globalization, the increased need to create consistent and recognizable experiences. And this idea of international brands rolling themselves out, into different countries, it's really uncovered a whole study into the nuances of, okay, I've got a brand and I stand for this, but now how do I make people in this culture really understand and interpret it in the way that I want them to? So there's lots of nuances of how, what we are, and then how to help people understand in a culturally sensitive way that brand that we're trying to communicate. Design literacy, there's some crazy stats out there. We see around 3,000 ads every day. We're bombarded with images, everything. People are just shouting louder. we as consumers, we're much more sensitive to a brand, and when there's a lot more noise out there, we're more sensitive to like what's good and what's bad. We all have an increased sensitivity to specific visual design and visual languages. Finite resources, lastly, and it kind of relates to the first one, but in this whole kind of context, specifically now, where it's like we're running out of finite resources, we've come to the end of this this period where, it's just infinite resources. We can just take and make and dispose. That whole linear chain, that's coming to an end. And why a brand, so the businesses in that sense, they can only go so far with a tangible and finite resource. And we're really learning these real, virgin materials like oil and things like that, they're running out. The business opportunity to build a brand, to build that value is then even more important, because that deals with an intangible asset and an infinite resource. So, where you can take that brand to is uncapped, like it is with, actual products. So let's get into, that's kind of a little bit of like where we've come to. And now this is like a context, I guess, for any brand that's operating today, any company. So on the first case, we've got choice. There's just a lot of things to choose from. There's just a lot more noise out there. And it's easier than ever before to check out those options, to shop around. And it's also never been more engaging and almost entertaining to shop around. If we've got all of these cereal boxes, all brightly colored with their own fonts and their own identity and things like that, if I'm walking down the aisle, it's almost like I walk into a party and everyone's trying to flirt with me. Everyone is trying to get my attention. They're trying to impress me. And as a consumer, that's flattering, but that's the psychology behind it all. Next, loyalty. I mean, a lack of loyalty comes hand in hand with an abundance of choice, right? If it's harder to then get people to zone in on you if they're so aware of so much choice. So it's harder to be chosen, and once you have been chosen, it's now even more hard to keep people's loyalty, because once upon a time, when there was less complex consumer demands and things like this, it was about, for a brand, it was about meeting their expectations, and it was doing what they expected of you. Now, it's kind of more and more like, to keep someone's loyalty, we have to keep on succeeding their expectations. We have to keep on keeping them interested and leading their expectations. A good example of this is in the online entertainment space, where you've got Hulu, you've got Amazon Prime, you've got Netflix, you've got HBO, you've got BBC, Sky, all of these things offering exactly the same service, but how they keep you engaged and wanting to keep that subscription going is the promise of new content. It's the promise of new things, more exciting things for you to come and have to look forward to. Next, speed. Simple one. Things just happen fast. Things can really, like with the advent of technology and huge companies underpinning the whole of our sort of commercial infrastructure, like your Googles, like your Apples, like all of these ones like Amazon and things like that, the speed at which it takes for something completely kind of game-changing potentially to be reached to the masses of people is scarily fast. And that's something that for a brand is pretty crazy to have to deal with, that potentially at any time, such a big fundamental change could happen that you're going to be ready to really jump and be agile to respond to it. And then lastly, shifting frames of reference. So this is kind of the idea that basically competition comes from not just your competitors anymore. It can come from anyone. In one frame of reference, right, I've got the amazing convenience of Uber. In another frame of reference, I've got the intimacy and the great suggestions of Amazon and how well it knows me. In another frame of reference, I've got Spotify's millions, crazy amount of choice at my fingertips, any time to go. So that's the thing with consumers. Once we realize, it doesn't matter if it's in the same category as not as what our brand operates in. Once a consumer has unlocked, they've realized that that's possible, that then becomes part of their expectations for business in general. So that's something that you kind of have to deal with. Again, that's also one of those things that's driving rising expectations. So that's a little bit about, just a quick pause, so that's a little bit about the current one. Now I want to kind of zoom in a bit about why we're here, which is about strategy, which is a bit more about navigating this context and where we've come from. So to kick off, I want to kind of just align with you guys to make sure that we're on the same page, right? What is it? What do we talk about what does it mean when we really talk about strategy? I'm just going to say it's a buzzword, right? So if anyone, what first comes to mind when you guys think about strategy? Any takers? The brand? The brand, right? Say again? A plan? Interesting. We'll come back to that one in a minute, actually. So we could go on, but let's not wait too much on this. So first of all, I want to go into what it's not, some myths about it. And it's good that you said it's a plan, because I'm going to touch on that. First myth of kind of strategy is that strategy should or has to be long-term, right? And that's easy to believe because in certain industries, certain markets, competitive landscapes can stay unchanged for a long period of time. If you think about the automotive car industry, largely speaking, the competitive landscape of that category remained unchanged until the advent of commercially available electric cars and companies like Tesla, who are really kind of disrupting that market. So it's easy to understand or think that they should be long term. But strategy it's not about understanding. It's not about just making a series of actions over a fixed period of time. What it's really about is understanding and having a framework for decision making on how and what you can do right now that's going to shape the future that's going to be in your advantage. So it's actually more of a present thing than it is a future thing or this long-term planning in brand strategy. So here's to come back to your point. So I have my plan because I have my strategy. So that is in that if I have a strategy, I therefore automatically have a plan of action, right? Now that's kind of not totally true, I feel, because in this day and age, when we're thinking about it, this brand strategy, the world's moving so fast. So actually a good brand strategy doesn't tell you what to do. It's more tells you how to react when certain things come up, right? It's a framework for decision making. It's a set of guiding principles which can be applied to a range of different situations or opportunities, more importantly. And this idea of a brand strategy as a decision guiding framework is a crucial part of, designing this fitting together kind of brand approach. To come back to your point about that it's a plan, of course, they do go hand in hand, and a strategy should suggest several things that you need to do.
But if you have a plan, you can change your strategy. Yeah? It's like...
But a strategy will dictate what the plan does. If I have a strategy on how I want to approach something, the plan of action, the steps that I can take to achieve that goal, I could do it in way A, I could do it in way B, I could do it in context C.
For example, to become some, I don't know, that's the goal. Public, yeah.
So, yeah, but it's exactly, so a strategy in this sense, it's like, it's an articulation of the goal, and we'll get into this a little bit later as well. It's an articulation of the goal, and then it will suggest, potential ways to get there, but it's not going to dictate that there's only one way to get there. That's a plan, is like, this is my chosen route to get there. And we can get into this a little bit more at the end. If you just keep your questions to the end, just make a note of this. I don't need a strategy, I just need to be agile. This is kind of, I guess, a bit more of one in the startup world, maybe. And I guess the important difference to make here is agility is not a strategy, it's a capability. You still need to have a strategic thought behind where to direct that capability. Agility is a great capability to have. It's one that can yield, short-term, operational, commercial benefits. Even darker. But again, it's a capability, not a strategy. And lastly, but what about a digital strategy? And this is something that, if you're a digital-only company, you have a strategy that, of course, is going to be, the equivalent to a digital strategy because that's the only platform you're rolling it out on. But a company is more like you should look at it more as an organism. And if you try to optimize the parts, if you try to focus on optimizing the digital strategy, the offline strategy, the pricing strategy, the this strategy, the that strategy, what you're going to do, you might optimize the parts, but you're going to sub-optimize the whole. And a good brand strategy really focuses on looking at and creating an idea of a strong whole and one that is going to guide your decisions and your thinking when you go into the different parts. So, some thoughts about what it's not. Interested, we can come back to those thoughts by all means at the end of them, at the end of the session. But now I want to get into just a couple of definitions of what it is. So, starting with business strategy here, one sort of definition that I found quite useful. So business strategy can be understood as the course of action or set of decisions which assist an organization in achieving specific business objectives, right? I think that's something that we can all agree on, that the idea of setting and achieving objectives is very central to a strategy. Another one. So business strategy is a combination of proactive actions on the part of management for the purpose of enhancing the company's market position and overall performance, and reactions to unexpected developments and market conditions. And that's a super important one because, you know, it's easy to think it's just what you do, but actually it's a real mixture between proactive things and also having a strong basis and framework for how you're going to react to things. Okay, so now let's take it down a level. Let's go down to brand strategy. A couple of key points that I want to just pull out and bring to your attention here. So here we've got brand is a combination of consumers' experiences with your businesses at every touch point. Every memory, thought, impression, website, blah, 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 you can read the rest. But it's the point here being that it's that whole, right? It's what loads of little things, loads of little micro moments add up to in the minds of the consumer. And again, it's another point I want to bring here. The strategy for how you and your team will build, shape, and share your brand is the articulation of what your brand is and aspires to be, the purpose it serves, and how you communicate it to the world. So that's the key one. What we take away from that is that it's articulating what your brand is in an ideal world. You know, you want to try and set that goal. As we saw in business strategy, it's about setting and achieving goals. But with branding, it's about articulating in an ideal world what you're going for, what is the goal there. And that's something that I want to get into today, actually. Is how we're going to think about that kind of whole, the goal that we're aiming for in brand strategy. So, setting your goal, what are we aiming for? How can we think about what we're really aiming for with our company, with our brand, in the eyes of the consumers? How can we create the clearest possible goal for your brand strategy plan? So, how can we think about this? You know, how is it going to guide you how to know how to make your shot when it's time to shoot? Something that's going to bring together and align people, brand teams and things like that, that's going to help them understand what action that they need to take, and something that articulates a whole, right? Very much like keeping it in a holistic sort of view, because ultimately when I look at a brand, a powerful brand like Apple, I don't think about individual moments that I've had with that brand. I think about just everything and all that adds up to in my mind. So what I want to kind of bring to you today of how we think about this is design or visualize a character. This is, I don't know if any of you guys played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 when you were younger. It's a great game. If you haven't tried it, make sure you do try it. But I had to think of this image because it's when you're very young, we're used to doing this on games, right? This idea of being able to design some avatar or thing that represents what we're trying to express in that world. And why this is kind of a good framework or way of thinking about it in general is because it captures the functional aspects, so the behaviors and things like that, and it also captures the more emotional qualities that a brand brings to your mind when you're looking at it. And it's something that helps to think about what you really want your audience to see. Strong brands bring to mind strong characters, and if I was going to I could almost visualize a Nike as a person. What sort of person would it be? An Apple as what sort of person? As a Headspace, what sort of person would that be? And a human is a system that already naturally can handle a lot of complexity and nuances. And it's a model that helps us in designing this character. We design them in a way that we kind of program them, and we're going to tell people, we're going to understand what they would do, so the proactive side of things, and also how they would react to things, because it's the same like us. I have my behavior, I have things that I do because I want to do them, because that's the way I am. But then I have a framework for just what makes me respond in certain ways to the world around me. So this is basically what it is. I just quite like this visual because it kind of sums up what I'm trying to do, because brand building is more and more complex in this world. There's more and more that you have to think about, right? There's new platforms, there's new techniques, there's new cultural shifts, there's new technology, there's new media. You know, it seems like there's just so many different aspects that you have to include or consider. So to keep a handle on it and not let this complexity get the better of you, you know, it needs a relatable outfit. You know, it needs that human kind of face, because that, at the end of the day, that's what your consumer, your audience is going to be dealing with. So I want to just dig in now to a little bit deeper into this, the aspects of this character, right, and how they would relate to a brand, a company. And before I get into this, because I'm going to use for each of these 4 sort of aspects, purpose, personality, behavior, and appearance, has everybody, I don't know, by general sound of approval, how many of you guys have heard of Headspace, the app? Yeah? Okay. About half and half. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Headspace it's a multi-million-dollar app that's designed to just help you meditate, basically. And it's guided meditations. You know, it's got different. It positions itself as a kind of expert on mental health and well-being. It's a very strong brand. They've done a great job of building it, and that's really what's led to their success. So I want to use that as an example, just so you know a little bit more what you mean, because this sort of thing can easily stay in quite a floaty, kind of philosophical, artsy space, and I really want to bring it down for you guys. And also, if any of you, you know, if you're working at a brand or a company or whatever, each of these 4, please have a think about what this means for you and your brand, and how this would reflect in your character or your brand. So let's get into purpose. So basically, it's quite obvious. You know, why was your character put on this planet? You know, we can ask it. You can answer the question of God, let's say, for our character. And this needs to be in simple terms. And it's also, I want to just point out that this doesn't need to be a profound, beautiful statement, you know, that's philosophical and it's artsy and, you know, like we're going to, I don't know, end world unhappiness or something like this, right? It's, if your business is selling kitchen products, your purpose is to help people have quality kitchen products in their kitchen. If your brand is, you know, mountain climbing gear, your mission is to just help people climb mountains. Just be honest with that. That's because this is going to set the tone for everything to come. So it needs to be rooted in real, honest evaluation of what your company is good at. So let's have a look what this means for, well, that's a bit dark, sorry about that. So for Headspace, their purpose is, we're on a mission to improve the health and happiness of the world. This is kind of a broad one, right? They have set out quite a broad one here. But what's good about this is they set an overarching goal, a longer term ambition, and they understand the what, but they have left quite a lot open as to the how. Okay, personality. So what sort of person are they? What is their character? What sort of qualities do they have and not have just as much? Because this is important, and this also will filter forward into the behaviors of your brand. The personality will dictate kind of how, in what style you will connect with your audience. Also, it sets the tone of voice that your brand's going to have with your audience. So let's have a look. What does this mean with the case of Headspace? So I just pulled a couple of pages from their brand book. So we've got these things. It's a bit philosophical. Trying to see things from the point of view of the stars as well as a grain of sand. So it's about, you know, thinking big, but also appreciating the small as well. Social media isn't the enemy. You know, it's not bitter. It's not positioned about what it's against. It's more positioned about what it's for. We've got simplifying complexity. We've got another statement, always meaningful versus always on. And so all of this sort of like, you know, plus my research that I did, of course, like it brings to mind a set of like words or qualities of a personality. In this case, this brings to mind, you know, correct, if you guys have any others, then, you know, I'm curious to hear, but this brings to mind a character that's understanding, that's considerate, it's modest, it's wise, it's nice, supportive, it's intelligently simple. I'm sorry, the text formatting went a bit funny there. Peaceful and healthy. Alternatively, and just as important to understand what it is to list what it's not. So it's not a person or a character that's excitable. It's not a person that's flamboyant, that's over the top. It's not a person that's arrogant or loud or exclusive to certain people, right? And that's not the only thing that, listing these characteristics is not the only way to actually bring this personality to life. The more dynamically you can do this, the more, strongly you can bring to mind and visualize in your mind a certain character. So, for example, when thinking about your brand personality, you could state that the personality is of someone that would prefer to stay in and drink and read a book as opposed to go out and take a pill at a rave. For example, this person would be more likely to find an offensive joke funny, or this person is very politically woke and very sensitive. Or this person could be the type of person to never try anything that they haven't tried before when they go and visit a new restaurant. All of these ways, these statements, they just help bring to mind a personality that's more emotional and more clear in the mind of your head. Words can only do so much, and that's what this model kind of tries to deal with a bit, because that's what a brand is. It's in your head. It's that feeling that's going on in your brain when you're looking at it or when you're engaging with it. Okay, moving on. So we've got now the appearance. Quite straightforward. What does your character look like? How will it be recognizable? This is kind of the more superficial level, and this is what most people think about when they think about branding. So this is the color palette, this is the logos, the formats, the fonts, the things like that. And the key issue, the challenge here, is to really set something that's consistent, that's really consistent across all platforms, wherever you go, or at least suggests, has a recognizable enough style that you could take part of it and it's still recognizable of the whole. Whether that's colors, design, motifs, things like that. For Headspace, this is their visual language, right? And I think this is a great example of something that's really consistent across all touch points that our customers are going to have. The person, the character, looks the same at every interaction that the person's going to have with that brand. Whether you arrive on their website here, their homepage, their Instagram page, their in-app experience, their sort of out-of-home advertising, it's all clearly drawn by the same person. Let's just go forward here to behavior now. This is a sort of last one, and this sort of is really influenced, of course, by the behavior, just like a person. But what sort of things does or would your character do? Is it a fighter? Is it a talker? Is it a lover? Where would this brand be? Would you be surprised if you saw this brand in a nightclub? Would you be surprised if you saw this brand in the opera house? Or would you be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because you're this sort of person. So it just kind of makes sense. And this comes from the personality, because depending on the personality, it then makes sense or doesn't make sense for certain behaviors. And let's see this for the Headspace one. So sorry about this, is a bit of a busy slide. I know there's a few different sort of marketing communication things here going on. So now that we understand what Headspace personality is, right, that it's understanding intelligently simple, it makes sense, right? As a supportive brand, as a supportive personality, it makes sense, supportive and understanding, let's say, it makes sense that they would go to the places where people need to de-stress and need some sort of mental assistance, so they would go and do an out-of-home campaign so I'm going to get out of the thing. It would make sense they would go to New York subway stations in peak times to give their message there. As an intelligently simple brand, it makes sense that they would team up with Nike to make a tailored version for athletes and recovery. It also makes sense that they would then team up with Alexa because they want to make things as easy as possible. As an understanding brand, and helpful brand, it makes sense that they would have a detailed onboarding process in their app that really, takes you through what you need to do to get set up. It makes sense that they would go to gyms to do talks because they know that that's when people are in the mindset where they're already sort of aspiring to be more healthy and be more happy. So these things, it's just kind of, these are all expressions of a brand. Whatever your brand does, in whatever touch point, they're all expressions of that brand. So it's an expression of a personality. And if that people can tell, on a kind of just like a feeling level, or you as a brand manager should also have that sensitivity to really understand and be like, we're this sort of brand, so it makes sense that we would do this, but it doesn't really make sense that we would do this. And that's what this model also, again, it tries to get at. It's that sort of emotive feeling part of a brand, tries to sort of capture it and visualize it. Okay, so a bit about, that's, the different building blocks. And the more clear that you can be with this kind of articulation. So this character is your brand objective, right? That's your ultimate goal. That's what your goal is trying to be. And everything else, everything that you do is taking steps to get the world to see what you have designed, that character, right? To see and perceive it how you want it, how you intended it to be. So it's like this guiding star, right? And you can sort of use this example to be like, oh, this opportunity's come along. What would my character do? How would they behave? What would they do? And what's kind of nice is, if you've got it really clear, so an opportunity or something comes up, and it's a yes or no decision. Would we do this? Would we not do this? If it's a no, if you're feeling more towards the no, you get an understanding of why not. If it's a yes, you should have a clear understanding of how you're going to respond to that, like a style in which you're going to do that. And let's get into this, for example. 3 people, by the way, I never thought I would put on a slide together. We've got Kanye West, Theresa May, God save us all, and Trevor from GTA 5, right? Very different, would you agree? Very different people, very different characters, very different brands. Different things come to mind when you see these people. So, with this idea of like, what would Kanye do or what would Theresa May do, you already get an idea. Even if we ask them the same thing, you already get an idea of how they would do it differently. If I asked each of these individually to make me a cup of tea, sorry for being stereotypical, but it's a good example. If I asked Kanye West to make me a cup of tea, what do you think would happen? How would he do it, right? He'd probably walk around a little bit, talk about himself a bit, this latest idea. The cup would probably be this beautiful minimal design. It brought to you on like a very minimal artsy table. Probably take quite a long time. If I asked Theresa May to do that, the same thing, the exact same thing, it would be a whole different experience, right? It would be very pleasant. I'm sure she'd be very polite, courteous. The tea would be delivered in this nice kind of bone china thing in her dark wood living room where she receives guests or whatever. And then if I asked Trevor from GTA 5 to do that, he probably wouldn't give a shit. He would serve it to me in a broken teacup. It'd be dirty water. He'd probably swear at me a few times on the way to do it, to complain. And this is what we're trying to get at in branding, especially in a world where a lot of people, a lot of businesses, their offerings aren't hugely different new. This is where the difference comes out with. This is where your competitive advantage is being able to connect with people so they know just as much what you do, but really how you do it as well. And the stronger you can create something like this in culture, the more you're going to stand out. Because this is something, that people can connect with. And this also, this suggests, I think, why we see more people who turn into brands. You've got your P. Diddy, Rihanna, Kanye West, and things like that. That brands are born from people, because by the time they reach such a position of influence and impact and connectivity with their audience, it matters less what they do, because everyone already they know what they're about. They know how they're going to do it. So then the expression, they understand, because I already like Kanye West, so I know, because it's come from him, I'm going to get the shoes anyway, because I know it's Kanye West's unique way of doing things, designing trainers. So to sum this sort of analogy framework up, this is the goal of your brand strategy, right? Is shared perception of your character. It's designing something and then taking the steps to make it happen. So you create this sort of character, this image, and then everything ladders down. So now everything that you do, it's getting the world to see it just like you see it. Because this brand, this person's going to live out in society and just in the day-to-day lives of our audience. Cool. So a last kind of word that I want to just touch on as well is positioning. A word on sort of brand positioning, because it's quite prominent in the domain or discipline of branding. I just want to say why I personally, I don't really like it. I don't feel like it's adaptive anymore. I feel it's a bit out of date. Mainly because the idea of positioning, it suggests something static. It suggests that you're trying to reach a static position in a well-defined area, right? Which is just less and less the case. Things are moving, things are changing way more. The shape of the playing field is being changed a lot, let alone where we then stand in that individual playing field. And I've just got a couple of further points why I think that this positioning, this approach, this designing a character approach, is a little bit more future forward than this positioning kind of idea. Because consumer expectations are moving ahead of businesses, right? As we said, by the time that we get, we do our whole thing to reach a certain position, customer expectations and realities are already off somewhere completely else. So positioned statically, you're always doomed in the long run to just fall behind and lose relevance. Positioning is just not quite agile enough. So next one, businesses will no longer be defined by categories, but by consumer needs. And why is this? Because needs stay and evolve, whereas categories will change. They might even become redundant. Think about this. My need for financial resources will probably way outlive banks, right? My need for transportation will way outlive the car industry. My need for food will probably outlive the supermarket industry. So that's why sticking to a need and something that can evolve, a character that can evolve alongside that, is way better than positioning yourself in a category, in an industry that things will change and leave you out of touch and with a lack of relevance. And then lastly, brands can no longer be considered as separate from the business. And this is just kind of, I think something general, when we talk about historically about positioning, branding is just it's not guesswork, and it has kind of historically had this reputation where it's like, okay, the real engine of value creation, our company is the manufacturing and things like that, and we do that in this style. But over here, what the consumers are going to say, or what they're going to see and engage with, it's kind of like it's whatever we feel like it is, and this like distance between like the business, what you as people who work for a business do, and how the consumers interact with that, the gap is just becoming way closer and closer because there's just not so much of a information asymmetry now. And as I say, just to come back, no, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that one there. So I want to wrap it up with my last slide with just some key kind of takeaways. So first one, realize the complexity in business and culture, but don't be intimidated or persuaded by the need to be complex yourself. This is about a brand. This brand strategy is about having something clear to guide your decision. So if it's kind of complex or confusing, then it's not going to do its job well. There's freedom in simplicity, and you also don't need to be profound. Next one, base your thinking in what you're really good at. Build from a genuine place, right? That's what I'm just saying. This gap is just not as big as it used to. Really, the key for like a longer term sort of success is like building it up from a really genuine place. And that includes, looking at your own business and the own people, because that's really like what it comes down to, is like, what are the people like that are working in the office, that are delivering the value to your customers, and how can we connect them in the most authentic way possible? And your brand strategy is about is a decision-making framework to help you structure your creativity and freedom, right? A good brand strategy should not be restrictive. Sure, it should guide you, it should suggest which ways to go, but this is an exciting time to be alive in terms of business. There's so much opportunity and freedom out there. So you surely want a brand strategy that allows you to structure how you approach freedom and opportunity and creativity, rather than just saying like, this is what we can do, and this is what we absolutely can't do. It's just not that black and white anymore. And then lastly, Constantly validate, explore what your audience perceives. That's something that I didn't really touch on today because the whole audience feedback loop is something that we could go into in a whole other talk, and how to do that and how to get those loops. But I just wanted to touch on it because, of course, your customers, you need to be in touch with them. If you're working towards this shared perception of a brand, you need to be in touch with them to temperature test how that's getting on and how you can sort of, you're doing focus groups or, surveys or anything to just keep in touch to understand what your customers are seeing. I think this is going to work. That's it. So that's the end of my speech, I think. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. I have that's my email there, davidkellas@vice.com. Instagram, DTR Kellas, telephone number. I don't particularly post anything professional on Instagram, so if you do follow me, that's nice, but if not, then also don't worry.